Just a few days ago, Mali officially removed French as an official state language, which has been the country's official language since the year 1960. Wow! This must be a milestone marking a great shift for Mali as a nation away from its colonial past. The West African country's new constitution, validated by the Constitutional Court on Friday the 21st of July, solidified this decision after gaining an overwhelming 96.91% approval in a June 18th referendum. The primary working language will now be French, while the nation's 13 national languages will receive formal recognition as official languages. Additionally, 70 local languages, including Bambara, Bobo, Dogon, and Minianka, some of which were granted national language status in 1982, will be retained. However, one might be inclined to ponder, what possible causes may have led to these new changes? Could the change be benched merely on developmental grounds? Or might there have been some dispute seething between these two nations, who have been known to share a strong cordial affinity over the years? Welcome to today's video. Stay put as we can't wait to unravel before you the recent affairs going on between Mali and Mali's ex-colonial overlord France, and why Mali officially resolved to drop French from being its official language any further. Don't forget to hit that like button as we ensure you get an interesting view from the fruits of things to the roots. Spread this content by sharing with friends, and then subscribe to get notifications on more tips which would be coming your way from time to time. Now let's get back on the road, shall we? Conflict background. This decision by Mali to shift away from the French comes at a time of growing anti-France sentiments in West Africa and on Mali's soil. Relations between Paris and Bamako have soured over accusations of military failures against jihadists and allegations of political interference. On the 17th of February 2022, it was announced that French troops, present in Mali since 2013 for counter-terrorism reasons, as well as the European partners involved in training missions, would withdraw from Malian soil. This decision followed an escalation of tensions between the junta and the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which culminated with the French Minister of Foreign Affairs describing the military junta, ruling Mali since the 18th of August 2020, as irresponsible and illegitimate. On the 31st of January 2022, provoked by this statement, the Malian junta summoned the French ambassador to Mali, ordering him to leave the country within 72 hours. Tensions between the Malian capital, Bamako, and Paris are not recent, as demonstrated by the heated 2020 POW summit between French President Emmanuel Macron and the heads of state of the 5 Sahelian countries, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Chad. These countries, also known as the G5 Sahel, were indeed asked to clarify their position regarding the French military intervention in the Sahel, following a growing number of disputed accusations of collaboration between terrorist groups and the French military. During the meeting, the threat of the withdrawal of French forces from the Sahel was put forward, and indeed, the number of French forces was halved in 2021, in the wake of France joining the European Union-led Takuba Task Force. The Takuba Task Force is a multinational military task force operating in the Sahel region of Africa. The force was created to support the G5 Sahel countries in their efforts to combat terrorism and instability in the region. In January 2012, the forces Armées Maliennes were expelled from the northern part of the country by Tuareg rebels and separatists of the National Movement for the Liberation of Azawad, acronym MNLA. The MNLA, whose members were mostly rebels returning from Libya after Gaddafi's demise, was helped by Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, acronym AQM, as well as by the Movement for the Uniqueness and the Jihad in Western Africa, acronym MUJAO. As a reaction to this military defeat, the Malian state allocated scarce weapons and resources for the military to fight Tuareg rebels. Officers of the National Army deemed it insignificant and thus started a mutiny. Therefore, on the 22nd of March 2012, the army seized power in a coup d'état, widely condemned by the international community. By the summer of 2012, the state of affairs in Mali was as such. The north of the country was controlled by AQM and MUJAO, which had turned on MNLA, and were starting to move towards the south of the country, which was under the authority of the army. It was in this context that Western actors decided to intervene in the Mali crisis. As soon as December 2012, the Security Council of the United Nations passed Resolution UNSCR 2085, which authorized the deployment of a military force in Mali. Following the resolution, France launched Operation Serval on the 11th of January 2013, which, according to Charbonneau, aimed at destroying the terrorist networks in northern Mali, that is, neutralizing at least 60% of their forces. In a minute, let us briefly broach on the relationship between France and Mali by driving back into history. France-Mali relations. The first significant contact between the two nations came in 1855, when the French erected a fort in present-day Médine. By 1892, Mali was declared a French colony, then called Soudan Français, that is, French Sudan, losing any semblance of economic, political, or social autonomy. The colonization of Mali was part of a larger scramble for Africa, where European powers sought to expand their influence and control over the continent. France had colonized Mali in the late 19th century as part of its larger colonial project in Africa. This was due to the information concerning the great wealth of Mali, which was brought to the French people by the explorer Auguste René Caillie. Auguste René Caillie was a French explorer and the first European to return alive from the town of Timbuktu. He had been preceded at Timbuktu by a British officer, Major Gordon Lang, who was murdered in September 1826 on leaving the city. The explorer, Caillie, had traveled inland from the Atlantic coast through the upper Niger River and reached Timbuktu in 1828. He was the first foreigner to witness and had extensively documented the great riches of Mali City. French colonialism in Mali had officially begun when French forces began to expand their control over the West African region, driven by economic interests and resources, particularly gold, diamonds, and copper in Mali, as well as the desire to spread their political and cultural influence. Mali was a strategic location for France because of its location along the Niger River and its rich natural resources. French colonial authorities sought to exploit these resources through the establishment of agricultural plantations, mining operations, and forced labor. Other but less notable motivations included the pretense of a civilizing mission and France's desire to exert political and military control over the region. France established a network of military bases throughout Mali and used its colonial authority to suppress resistance movements and maintain control over the local population. For example, the global cotton industry during the initial period of the 1900s was remarkably unstable. Farmers from Mali frequently yielded meager or insignificant gains from their cotton harvests. In addition, as a lucrative agricultural product, peanuts generated a greater profit margin compared with cotton. Hence, Malian farmers had attempted to oppose the endeavors of colonial authorities to mandate cotton production. Nevertheless, in the 1930s, the colonial government established the Office du Niger, which implemented a scheme of compulsory labor and levies that forced Malian farmers to engage in cotton cultivation for overseas trade. France, the former colonial overlord of Mali, had ruled from the capital in Bamako, which later became the capital of the newborn Republic of Mali. French rule had influenced Mali in several aspects, such as the adoption of the French language as the main language of Mali. Due to this, France and Mali have a strong connection. Both are members of the International Organization of Francophonie, OIF, an institution bringing together French-speaking countries and promoting the French language and cultural diversity. There are over 120,000 Malians in France. Despite gaining its independence in 1960, Mali has maintained close relationships with France these post-colonial years that often take the form of paternalistic economic and military interventions. Many would readily argue that France all along, by means of its endeavor towards Mali, have been trying to make up for the old great's wounds it has caused the nation, as most of its modern-day adversities, political and economic, have been brought on the nation by those lengthy years of the colonial impact suffered. Okay then, let's take a quick look at France's colonial impact on Mali and then see how correct they are. France colonial impact on Mali. 1. Economic exploitation. During the colonial period, from 1892 to 1960, French rule in Mali was characterized by extensive economic exploitation. The French extracted vast quantities of Mali's natural resources, such as gold from places like Sadiola and Lulo, and uranium from mines like Arlit, to fuel their own industrialization and economic growth. Agricultural products like peanuts and cotton were also heavily exploited for export, leading to Mali's economy becoming dependent on these few commodities. This exploitation left Mali vulnerable to fluctuations in global markets, a situation that continued even after independence due to neo-colonial economic policies and ties. 2. Social and cultural disruptions. Throughout the colonial era, the imposition of French culture and values had a profound impact on Mali's social fabric. From the late 1800s to the mid-1900s, indigenous languages and traditions faced suppression as French became the dominant language and colonial education systems were introduced. The French colonial authorities often favored certain ethnic groups, such as the Bambara and the Tuareg, creating divisions and tensions that persist to this day. The erosion of cultural identity and practices led to a disconnect between older generations, who upheld traditional values, and younger ones influenced by Western ideals. 3. Infrastructure disparities. Infrastructure development under French colonial rule was primarily focused on facilitating resource extraction and administrative control. Major projects such as railways and roads were constructed, but they mainly benefited urban centers and areas near trade routes. Rural and remote regions remained neglected, hindering their development and access to basic services. These disparities in infrastructure have continued to be a challenge for Mali's equitable development. 4. Forced labor and human rights abuses. During the colonial era, forced labor systems were employed by the French colonial administration, particularly through the circle system. From the late 1800s to the mid-1900s, local laborers were compelled to work on public projects without pay, leading to significant human rights abuses and exploitation of the local population. This practice perpetuated poverty and marginalization, leaving a lasting impact on Mali's society. 5. Education and legacy of knowledge. The French education system aimed to produce a class of educated individuals loyal to the colonial administration and French ideals, thereby reinforcing the colonial power's control over the region. This approach resulted in a disconnection between the education provided and the local needs and realities of Mali. As a consequence, the education system did not adequately address the country's unique challenges and developmental requirements. Even after gaining independence in 1960, the legacy of this deceptive education system persisted, posing challenges in promoting inclusive and culturally relevant education. The focus on promoting French culture and language continued, leading to limited opportunities for the promotion of indigenous knowledge and languages. This lack of representation and recognition for local cultures perpetuated a sense of cultural inferiority among Mali's population, hindering their ability to embrace and celebrate their heritage fully. Efforts to strike a balance between preserving cultural heritage and embracing global knowledge had remained ongoing until this breaking point. 6. Political legacy and fragmentation. France's colonial impact on Mali's political legacy and fragmentation left lasting effects. The centralization of administrative power in Bamako resulted in limited regional representation, unequal development, and a fragmented national identity. Local governance was suppressed, artificial borders were imposed, and authoritarian rule persisted. These factors continue to shape Mali's political landscape even after gaining independence in 1960. 7. Continuing influence of Francophone ties. After gaining independence, Mali's ties with France have remained strong, driven by cultural, economic, and military cooperation. These ties have been shaped by historical connections, contemporary geopolitical interests, and regional dynamics. The French language and culture continue to have an impact on Mali, and economic dependencies persist, creating challenges in asserting Mali's national identity and sovereignty fully. 8. Conflict and instability. The legacy of colonial borders and ethnic tensions, exacerbated during the colonial era, has contributed to various conflicts and instability in Mali since independence. Competing claims over land, resources, and political representation have led to ethnic and regional tensions, resulting in periodic violence and insecurity. The consequences of historical divisions and disputes continue to be relevant in the post-colonial era. In conclusion, the decision of Mali to drop French as its official language reflects a complex post-colonial relationship with France. It raises questions about France's motivations in supporting Mali throughout the years, whether it is driven by genuine empathy or an attempt to make amends for past colonial injustices. As we reflect on the history and impact of this relationship, we invite your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed the content, please like, share, and subscribe for more informative updates in the future. Your input is always appreciated. See you ASAP!